So Chris, give us a bit of background into this new network opportunity.
Yeah, so as some of you will have heard me speak about before, a few Sundays ago at ABC, I talked about a new network that we have been invited to participate in. Now, I don't intend here in this video to go into all the details of that because I did it on that Sunday and then I blogged straight away after that. So I just want to encourage you, if you're not really too sure about what we're talking about when it comes to this network, to please go and check out that blog that's on our ABC website about the new network opportunity. But basically, over the last few years, we've been having some conversations with some other churches about how we might help one another build churches that people who don't normally go to church would love to attend. And that has begun now to crystallize into the idea of some kind of UK network of like-minded churches who are exploring that together and figuring out what that looks like and what that means, with some help from a church called North Point Community Church, which is based in Atlanta in the USA, who are doing this wonderfully well in their context and have stuff that they are happy and willing to share and help us with as we figure out in the UK and Ireland what that looks like to contextualize that into our own context. So basically, this network will be a gathering of like-minded churches in the UK and Ireland with a vision that ultimately there would be at least one of these kinds of churches in every community in the UK and Ireland. So people who don't know God, people who are far from God, have a church that they can engage with locally to them.
Great. So how did we come to be invited to participate in this network?
Yeah. So Chris, that's a great question. And this goes back some time, actually. I'm a trustee of an organisation called Lead Academy, and we do leadership training for church leadership teams. And I've been involved with that since its beginning, actually, about 8 or 9 years ago. And over the years, we've done lots of training with lots of different churches from all sorts of different streams of denominations and so on. And as part of that, we're always looking at Lead Academy for new materials and resources and leaders and churches that we can talk to give input to the church leadership teams that are coming. And we use people from all across the UK, from Ireland, and in fact from all across the world. And a few years ago, some of the Lead Academy team and trustees, we travelled to Atlanta to a conference called Drive, which was hosted by North Point Community Church. And we loved it. We had an amazing time at the conference and we learned a huge amount. And to cut then a very long story short, we at Lead Academy invited one of the senior leaders from North Point, a great guy called Lane Jones, to come back and spend some time on one of our learning communities with some church leadership teams. And from that, sort of a relationship has built, I guess. But it's also built with 4 or 5 other churches who, some of whom are part of Lead Academy, some of whom not, who are keen to explore what this looks like to build churches that people who don't normally go to church love to attend. And so through all of that, these relationships have been forming. And as I said earlier, for the last couple of years or so, those 4 or 5 churches have been getting together and just saying, well, what might this look like? How might we help one another? And then we have approached North Point and said, how could you help us? And North Point have been incredibly gracious and kind and have offered us all sorts of help and support and encouragement. But from the point of view really of us asking them. So I think it's really important to be clear, North Point are not driving this. This is not something they've approached us to do. We've approached them. And we've been invited as a church to participate, primarily, I guess, through my connections with Lead Academy, but also through these conversations with these other 4 or 5 churches. And so we've been invited to participate as a founding member of the network, really because of the work we're trying to do here at ABC and our vision and mission, which we've been exploring together over the last 2 years or so, to be that kind of church. And there are other churches that would love to learn from us, and there are other things we can learn from other churches. So that's how we sort of come to be invited to participate in this network.
That's great. So who are these other churches who have also been invited and been in these conversations about the network?
Yeah. So there are 4 other churches and ourselves. So Finch Hampstead Baptist Church near Reading, the Forge Church in Suffolk, which is a great church doing some really amazing things in rural Suffolk. There's a church called Life Church Central in Hales Owen, just outside Birmingham, quite a large church, doing some really interesting things in that part of the world. There's a church called Lighthouse Church in Ireland, based in Dublin, and they're an extraordinary church. They're a little bit smaller than some of the other churches, but they are reaching out with the love of God in a very difficult and unusual context, and they're doing some amazing things. So 4 other really exciting churches, from different streams and denominations, but who all have that sort of same heart and vision for reaching out with the love of God to people who don't know it.
But isn't this just an American thing? How does it translate to our context here in the UK?
Yeah, so I think this is another really important question to answer, because we can get concerned, and rightly concerned, about the influence of the US, or are we just going to take a model from the US and apply it in our context, and will that really work? So that's a really important thing to talk about. So again, just to make the point, we approach North Point. So it's a UK and Ireland network. And it's a network of UK and Irish churches. But we recognise, I think, together that the principles and values that they hold at North Point have a lot to teach us, and actually a lot that we can learn from, but also that we share. And the North Point folks understand that this is not just about saying, let's take a model that's working in the southern part of the United States and let's import it into a UK and Irish context. That's not it at all. And actually, one of the things we really love about North Point is their humility and their understanding that there are different cultures and contexts across the different sides of the Atlantic. So it's very much not a US thing. It's a UK and Irish driven thing, but asking some people who are doing some really great things in a different part of the world to help us, but completely understanding that we need to understand our own context and to contextualize anything we are learning from North Point to our culture. And that's one of the things the network is going to help us do, because we're all in the same boat in the UK and Ireland, and we're all trying to contextualize that for our own UK culture. So not an American-driven thing, a UK-driven thing, but with stuff that we can definitely learn from this wonderful church across the other side of the Atlantic.
So you talked a bit about values there. What are those values?
Yeah, so the people who have been involved in these conversations around the network have identified, with some input from North Point, what those kind of critical values might be. And I'm going to read them, so because I can't necessarily remember them all. So I'm going to read them from here. But here are those core values that the network will hold on to and will try to promote and encourage and help churches do. And it's these: the desire to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus, creating and operating churches that are trying to be places that attract and engage unchurched people, a commitment to focusing on reaching people with the good news of Jesus, creating irresistible environments that connect people to God and to community, creating relevant and engaging worship services, intentionally helping people into good small groups, and prioritizing children's and youth ministry. So those are the core kind of principles or values that people who are part of the network will be asked to engage with and to agree with, I suppose, and to seek to build in their churches. But I hope you can see, if you're part of ABC, I hope you can see that there's nothing that is unusual for us. These are all the sorts of things that we're talking about, and that's why I think we resonate and think this opportunity is such a good one, because there's such a close tie-up between where we think God is calling us as a church and between what this network is going to try to do.
Okay, you touched on this a bit earlier, but one of our concerns might be that will North Point Community Church just be telling us what to do?
Yeah. So again, the answer to that is a very clear no. So North Point understand, and we understand, all the churches that have been talking about this network, that we are in two different contexts. And what North Point are keen to say is, let's work where we have shared underlying principles, and those principles we've just talked about. Let's not talk about trying to import a model or a way of doing things, or saying you have to do this, that, or the other. And frankly, those of us in this UK network would be running away from that if that were what was being suggested, because a model that works in one part of the world doesn't necessarily work in another part of the world. So they won't be telling us what to do. They understand we're in a different context. And in fact, each of our churches in the UK is in a slightly different context. But it's about how we can work to deliver those principles and core values in our own context and situation, whatever that might look like.
So Chris, if we decide to join this network and be a part of it, we understand we need to contribute financially to that. Now, where will that money go and how will it be used?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Chris. We do need to contribute financially, or we're being asked to contribute financially if we're part of the network. So the first thing that's important to say is that this network will be established as a UK registered charity, and it will have a UK board of trustees. So all the money that is given from UK churches to the network will go to that UK registered charity and will be used for the work of the network in the UK. No money will go from the network to North Point. And in fact, the only money that's flowing between the network and North Point is actually coming the other way, in that North Point have very graciously and kindly agreed that they will contribute some money towards the UK network to help it get up and running over the first few years of its life. So all the money that's given by UK churches, including any money that we give if we're a part of the network, will go to the UK charity and will be used for the work of the network in the UK.
Now, on the flyer we've seen, it said some staff time will be put towards this new network. Where will the staff time come from, and how will that be invested in the network?
Yeah, so that's absolutely right. We will give some staff time to this if we're a part of it. So there are a couple of different ways that will happen. Each of the founding churches of the network is being asked to give a trustee onto that UK board of trustees. So if we're a part of the network, we've agreed that that would be me, and so some of my time would go towards that board of trustees. I have reduced some of my other external commitments, and particularly some commitments with Lead Academy, so that if we decide to do this, I've got some time to be able to contribute to it. Our other staff members may be asked to contribute some time, so we may be asked to help with some website development and that kind of stuff for the network, and we'll just have to be very careful about how we watch that. We think we can do that. Some of the staff time that we would give has been used for other projects that have come to an end. So for example, Chris Choules here may well be involved with some of the work of some of the website development and that kind of stuff. But one of the big projects he was involved in last year and into this year was our Next Steps project that's basically come to an end. So we'll allocate some of that time to doing this. Some of our staff will receive some coaching and training and do some coaching calls with other churches in the UK from the network, and that will come out of the time we give for their training and development, and we have training and development plans for them, and this would be a part of that. Then in terms of the time we would give to helping other churches, which is a part of what we'll be asked to do as part of this network, we'll just have to monitor that and keep an eye on it. You know, we're passionate as a church about helping and supporting other churches. We already do that in a number of different ways, but we think that's part of who God's calling us to be. We're so blessed with so many resources here at ABC, and we think that we need to pass that on to others. What we will need to do, because that's a little bit more ad hoc, is we'll just have to keep an eye on that and make sure it's not becoming too burdensome and taking up too much of our staff time. But we already do that to a certain extent. So for example, you know, if I get asked to be involved in helping and supporting other churches, which I do sometimes, then I just talk to the elders about that as my sort of supervisors, I suppose, and just make sure we've got that in good balance and that we're not burning people out or we're not overdoing it. So we would just do that with those sort of ad hoc requests that we get for staff to help other churches.
Thank you. Now, where will the money we give to the network come from?
Yeah, so what we're being asked to consider is a 5-year commitment to the network, as far as we're able to tell at this point. And over that period of time, we'll be asked to contribute financially. And ultimately, we'd be looking to ramp that financial contribution up to about £7,500 a year by year 4 or 5. But we will move to that slowly, so we won't start at that level. And part of the benefit that we will get if we join the network is that the children's and youth material that we currently use here at ABC is called Orange. And that will become free to us if we become part of the network. And we currently spend around £2,500 a year on that. So initially, and we're talking about a contribution of about £1,500 in the first year and then slowly growing. So you can see over those first couple of years, actually we'll be a net receiver from the network because we would save money from this children's and youth resources. So we're easily covered for the first couple of years of being a part of this if we decide to do that. After that, this money would come from the money we give away as a church to external causes and organisations, and we give a chunk of our income away to those. So we would just have to review that, and we're planning a review of all of that this year. And as part of that review, we'd throw this into the mix and say, well, okay, how are we going to fund that going forward? And there are two possible ways we could do that. One is that we could grow the amount of money that we give away, and hopefully, as our income grows as a church, then the amount we would give away would grow in proportion with that. So it may well be that we can do that way. The other possibility is that we would have to reallocate some of what we currently give away to external organisations to this instead. But we would do that carefully and sensitively as part of this review that we're planning this year of what we give our external causes money to. So that it's a little bit vague, and I appreciate that right now, but the network would also say to us that they'd much rather have us as a church with our input and learning than our money. So we think that there's flexibility there. So if we suddenly found we couldn't afford it or we couldn't give to a certain level, then there would be a lot of flexibility about that. So our desire would be to move to that £7,500 a year, but we've got some flexibility within that.
So Chris, we've heard a little bit about a guy called Andy Stanley who leads North Point in America. What will his involvement be in the network?
Yeah. So as you rightly say, Andy Stanley is the founding and senior pastor of North Point Church, and you may have heard of him. He's written lots of books and talks about their experiences as a church. He's a great guy, but actually this network is not really about Andy Stanley. So Andy Stanley is the leader of North Point, and as such has led the church as their pastor into living out these values and principles and so on. But the network isn't really about him. It's not an Andy Stanley network. It's a UK network looking to live out the principles which he is leading his church in living out in Atlanta. So whilst a lot of what Andy Stanley does and says is helpful, the network isn't really about him, and we haven't been talking to him about it. So the people we've been liaising with at North Point have been a part of their international team. So we haven't had conversations with Andy Stanley about this. He's not really involved, other than the fact that he leads North Point Church. What I would say, and I'd encourage people to do, if you want to unpack these principles a little bit more, I would encourage people to read a book that he wrote called Deep and Wide, which is a great book in which he unpacks a lot of these principles that they're trying to live out, and that we, a number of us around here at ABC, have read and found really helpful. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that.
Thank you. Now, we have read some rather controversial stuff about Andy Stanley on the internet recently. Is it true?
Yeah, so sadly, you don't have to dig very far on the internet these days to find somebody somewhere who will have a criticism or a go at somebody, particularly somebody who is leading a large and very successful church in the US. There's a lot of that around, sadly, in the US. And Andy Stanley is no exception. That there have been some things written about him. All I would say is, please be really careful about what you read and believe on the internet. So one of the websites, I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of naming them here, but one of the websites that writes about him very critically and criticizes some of what he says is a particularly horrible website, actually, where they do this for a whole load of people and a whole load of different things. So, for example, that same website criticizes the Alpha Course as being unbiblical and doctrinally not sound. They criticize Justin Welby and Nicky Gumbel and Timothy Keller and basically any well-known Christian who's doing something that God seems to be blessing. So we'd want to take real care about that. All I can tell you, I've only met Andy Stanley very briefly myself. I've met a lot of the other senior leaders at North Point, and all I can tell you is I've always found them to be just wonderful, humble, gentle, servant-hearted people, regular people with normal families and, not driving around in posh limousines or anything like that, and just to be very humble people who would just have a real desire to serve the local church. So I think we just need to take care. I don't think that those criticisms are valid. I mean, sometimes Andy Stanley says something that if you took it out of context, you might say, well, okay, that sounds a little bit strange. But what I would encourage people to do is just to read some of his stuff. His latest book, a book called Irresistible, one or two people have made criticisms of. I've read it. I think it's a great book, actually. I don't necessarily agree with everything that he says, but the way that he talks about the old covenant and the new covenant and what Jesus came to do, and the heart of that being about loving God and loving people, is just fantastic and paints a great picture of what it was Jesus came to instigate when he came to earth. So I just would encourage people to read that stuff, to make up their own minds. If you do want to talk further about any of that stuff you might have read on the internet, then please do come and have a conversation. But I would just be really careful about the source of that stuff, which is often very, very unhelpful.
Thanks for answering that one. Now, how will the success of the network be managed? What does a win look like?
Yeah, I think this is a really important thing, because what these founding churches are all being asked to consider is a 5-year commitment to the network. And there will need to be, and there will be, a review towards the end of that 5-year period to say, well, look, how's that gone? Should this stop now? Is it worth continuing? Should each of the churches continue to be involved, and so on? So if we agree to be part of it, we would be part of that review process, and we would want to review as a church whether we would carry on our commitment to it. And, we could pull out if we needed to. So success, and I put in quotes success, has been set out. What does this network hope to do? So success would be measured by a number of things. So the network has a desire and a heart to grow as it impacts other churches and other churches join. So the idea and the hope and the prayer would be that by the end of that 5-year period, a dozen other churches have joined the network to be a part of it, which will be a big step towards that vision of having a church that people who don't normally go to church love to attend in every part of the country. But it'll also mean the network becomes more sustainable because there are more people involved in it, sharing the financial burden and all of that kind of stuff. So that is one way that success will be measured. So has the word spread? Has the network done the work it hoped to do in sharing with other churches and inviting other churches to be a part of it, and have a dozen or up to a dozen other churches signed up to be a part of it? The other way that success will be measured will be how effective the network has been in helping the churches who are a part of it. So right from the very beginning, all the churches who are part of the network will be asked to contribute to a dashboard of important measurements for the church. Now, we do this already as it happens as a church. We keep all this information, but things like how many baptisms, how many first-time visitors, how many people come to the services, how many children and young people are you serving, how are small groups doing, all of those kind of things. And we'll be asked to contribute that information so the network will be able to say, well, these churches that we're helping are experiencing growth or more baptisms or more people in small groups or better children's and youth work or whatever it is, so that we will be able to tell really clearly, is this network doing what it's supposed to do in terms of helping churches get better and grow and develop. So that's how success will be measured, and there's some very clear criteria against which we'll be able to do that.
That's really helpful, thank you. Now, you alluded to it there, but are we committed to it forever?
Yeah, no, definitely not. So again, the language that's being used is this. So the founding churches are being asked, as far as they can tell at this moment in time, to commit to a 5-year period initially. And the as far as we can tell thing is really important, because things sometimes do change, or situations or circumstances change that we can't predict. And so it may be necessary to come out of it at that stage. But as far as we can tell, to commit for that 5-year period to get the network up and running, established, and so on. And so that would be our commitment. And then there will be this very clear review for us and for the network to say, well, look, what happens next? So our commitment would be to, as far as we can tell, that 5-year period, and then we can stop if we wanted to stop.
Great, thank you. Now, will this impact our commitment to the other organisations we're linked with, like the Baptist Union and Andover Churches Together?
Yeah, so we are absolutely sure not, that it won't affect our commitment. So we will still be a part of the Baptist Union and contributing to our Union of Baptist Churches. We'd still very much be a part of Andover Churches Together, ACT, and we don't think that will impact our commitment to those organisations. What we do hope, though, is that actually those other organisations we're a part of, both the Baptist Union Union and Andover churches together, and the other churches that we help and support locally will benefit from this too, because the things we're learning, they may well have questions about, or they may well want to learn from as well. So it may well be actually that both our Union of Baptist Churches, but also our presence locally here in Andover could be benefited too, as we learn things that other churches may want to learn from. So we already have other churches coming to us and asking us for help and support because of some of the things we're doing, particularly in this area of reaching unchurched people. So this can only help us, we think, in terms of that support that we're giving to other churches.
So Chris, we've got this vision as a church to be for Andover. Now, some people might be wondering whether this will have an impact on that, or whether we will be for Andover less than for the rest of the country.
Yeah. Again, I think we really hope not. So some of you, if you've been to ABC, you'll notice in our lobby we have this sign up that says, "For too long churches have been known for what they're against, and we want to be known for what we are for, and we are for Andover." And actually that quote comes directly from a planted church from North Point, a church called Gwinnett Church, which is where I first saw it a number of years ago. In fact, probably that conference I was talking about right at the beginning of this video. So the North Point churches have a passion to be for their local communities. And again, actually, we think this network will really help us with that, because they, again, will have stuff that they can help us with in terms of how we become even more for Andover than we are already. And one of the things I'm really excited about is that those other founding churches in the UK that we've talked about, Finch Hampstead Baptist Church, The Forge, Life Church, and so on, they are doing amazing things in their local communities, and they are passionate about their local communities. And again, we have stuff we can learn from them. So yes, it will have a national, a UK and Ireland focus, this network, but we are going to be learning from it as well as helping other churches. And I'm really excited. One of the big things we are going to learn, I think, is how we can do even better at being for Andover and even more engaged in our local community. So I think this is really going to help us in that vision.
So Chris, when will the final decision be made on this? When's the big day?
Yeah, so we are moving towards taking a decision at our church members meeting on Thursday the 28th of February. So we started talking about this with the church about 6 weeks ago, or it'll be 6 weeks when we get to that meeting. And so we're going to be asking the question together on the 28th of February, and are we in a place where we can decide together whether or not it's God's will that we should be part of this new network. I still want to encourage, if you've got other questions that I haven't answered here, or concerns or issues, please do come and speak to me or to one of the other elders before that meeting, so that we can try and answer as much as we can to help in that prayerful discernment process leading up to that meeting on the 28th. The other thing I just want to say is that all the way through this process, actually, and through these conversations that have been had with these other churches and so on, I've been involved in those, and I've been keeping the elders and leaders up to date with all of that as we've been moving through these conversations. And our elders and leaders are recommending that we take a decision to be part of this network. They believe, as I do, that this is something that will really help and benefit us as a church. So please do continue to talk with us if you've got any questions or concerns. And at that meeting on the 28th, we'll be having a further discussion, and then we'll be looking to see if we can make a decision on whether or not we believe it's God's will that we join.